When she first saw the old Boeing 727, it didn't look like much. The paint was peeling, the wings were rusted, and weeds had grown high around its wheels. It sat forgotten in a small aircraft graveyard, silent and broken. But where others saw a useless pile of metal, she saw something else. Something extraordinary. She didn't even hesitate when the man said it would cost her just $2,000. Everyone thought she was crazy. "What are you going to do with that?" They laughed. She smiled and said only, "You'll see." The day the plane arrived on her property, neighbors came out to watch. A giant truck pulled the fuselage through narrow country roads, its engines long dead but its story far from over. Children pointed. Cameras flashed. No one could understand why a single woman would spend her savings on an airplane she couldn't fly. She stood beside it as the sun went down, running her hand along the cold metal skin. "We are going to make you beautiful again," she whispered. For months, no one saw much of her. The sound of tools and hammers echoed from her backyard. She worked late into the night, lights glowing from inside the old aircraft like a secret laboratory. People started calling her the Plane Lady. Some said she was building a restaurant, others said a museum. But she kept her plans quiet. Only one thing was clear: something emotional, something deeply personal, was taking shape behind those silver walls. Inside, she discovered the plane's history, its logbooks, flight maps, faded photographs of passengers. She found a note scratched into a metal panel near the cockpit. Asterisk, safe journeys, always. Asterisk, it felt like a message meant for her. Every bolt she turned, every wire she replaced, felt like reviving a heart that had been still for too long. She wasn't just fixing an airplane. She was building something that would change how people saw broken things forever. And when she finally opened the door to reveal what she had created inside, no one was prepared for what they saw. The project started on a cold morning, with her standing in front of the hollow shell of the Boeing 727, holding a wrench in one hand and a notebook in the other. She had never rebuilt a plane before. She wasn't an engineer or a designer, just a woman with a dream too big to explain. The first days were slow, filled with mistakes and small victories. The floor panels were warped, the insulation ruined by years of neglect, and every corner smelled faintly of oil and rust. Still, she refused to give up. She took photos, wrote notes, and made sketches of every piece she removed. "You start small," she would whisper to herself. "One screw at a time." Her neighbors would watch from across the fence. "You really think this thing will ever fly?" one asked. She smiled without looking up. "It already is," she said quietly, turning another bolt. It wasn't about flying. It was about something else, something only she could see. Day after day, she stripped the interior down to its bones. The walls, once lined with dull grey panels, became bare aluminum, reflecting sunlight in bright flashes. She worked until her hands ached, and when she couldn't lift another tool, she sat inside the empty cabin, staring out the small round windows. It was quiet there, peaceful. The kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts. Sometimes, she'd close her eyes and imagine the plane full again. Passengers laughing, engines humming, clouds rolling past. Then she'd open her eyes and get back to work. She started collecting materials from thrift stores, scrapyards, and garage sales. Every piece she brought home had a story. Old wooden planks from a barn became part of the flooring. Discarded light fixtures from an antique shop became the cabin lamps. The cockpit, once covered in dust, slowly came to life again, not as a place to fly from, but as a small reading nook with shelves, a lamp, and her favorite chair. As the weeks turned into months, the transformation grew more dramatic. She replaced the narrow seats with wide wooden benches. She built a small kitchen where the galley once stood, adding soft lighting and polished countertops. The narrow aisles, once filled with passengers hurrying to their seats, now led to cozy corners with warm rugs and curtains that she sewed by hand. What was once cold metal now felt like a home. The hardest part was rewiring the plane's old electrical system. She spent nights studying diagrams and watching tutorials, learning one connection at a time. Her son, who visited occasionally, would shake his head and laugh. "Mom, you could have just bought a camper," he'd say. She'd grin and reply, "But where's the fun in that?" When the lights finally came on for the first time, she stood in the doorway, tears filling her eyes. The glow wasn't bright or perfect. It flickered slightly, but it was alive. One evening, a storm rolled in. The wind howled through the trees, and rain hammered against the aluminum shell. She sat inside, listening to the sound, feeling safe for the first time in years. That night, she realized why she'd done all this. The plane had become a reflection of her own life, damaged, abandoned, but still full of potential. A few days later, she found something strange while cleaning the back section of the plane. Tucked inside a panel was an old envelope, brittle with age. Inside it were photographs of the Boeing 727 during its glory days, flying across oceans, carrying smiling passengers, and standing proud on bright runways. On the back of one photo was a handwritten note, *, every flight has a story. Every landing is a beginning. *, she held the photo to her chest and whispered, I know. From that day forward, she worked with a new energy. She painted the exterior a deep, shining silver, polished until it gleamed under the sun. She planted flowers around the base and added a wooden staircase to the main door. Slowly, the whispers in town changed. People stopped calling it that wrecked airplane and started calling it her plane. Visitors began to stop by. Some came out of curiosity, others to see if the rumors were true. They would peek inside and fall silent. No one expected the warmth, the beauty, or the feeling that lingered there. It wasn't just a renovation. It was resurrection. Every inch of the plane seemed to carry emotion, love, pain, hope, all welded into the walls. And though the engines would never roar again, it had found a new way to fly. The first person she invited inside was a stranger. A local journalist had heard whispers about the woman who lived in a plane, and came knocking one morning with a camera and a notebook. She hesitated before letting him in. Her project wasn't ready, not yet. But something in his polite smile made her step aside. It's not perfect, she warned. He chuckled. That's why I'm here. When he walked inside, he stopped in his tracks. The old Boeing 727 no longer looked like an aircraft. It looked like something out of a dream. The floor was made of warm oak wood, the walls lined with soft lighting that glowed like sunlight at dusk. A small fireplace flickered in the corner, filling the air with the smell of burning cedar. The narrow cabin, once cold and metallic, felt alive. Every corner had purpose. Every detail told a story. He ran his hand along the wall. You did all this yourself. She nodded, smiling faintly. Every nail, every stitch. He took a slow look around, speechless. Why? He finally asked. She paused before answering. Because it deserved another chance. Just like me. The story spread quickly. Within weeks, people began showing up from nearby towns, curious travelers, architecture students, dreamers. Some just wanted to see it with their own eyes. Others wanted to understand how one woman could turn scrap metal into something so full of life. She welcomed everyone with the same soft smile and a cup of tea brewed in her tiny plain kitchen. Each visitor left changed, touched in ways they couldn't quite explain. One evening, a man in his 60s arrived unannounced. He wore a faded pilot's jacket, and his eyes glistened when he saw the plane. I used to fly one just like this, he said quietly. She led him inside, and as he ran his fingers over the restored panels, tears welled up in his eyes. I flew this exact plane, he whispered. She turned to him, surprised. He nodded. 727 to 200 series, tail number ending in 53A. I remember because it was my first commercial route. He sat down on one of her handmade benches and took a deep breath. I never thought I'd see her again. He looked around, shaking his head. You brought her back. His voice cracked with emotion. She didn't know what to say. For a moment, they both sat in silence, the hum of evening insects filling the air outside. That night, the pilot told her stories about the plane's early years, the long flights across continents, the families it carried, the laughter that once filled its aisles. He said something that stayed with her. Planes aren't just metal and engines. They carry memories. You've turned this one into a home for all of them. After he left, she stood in the doorway, the cool air brushing her face. She realized the project had become more than hers. It belonged to everyone who ever needed proof that broken things could be beautiful again. As word spread, she began getting letters, handwritten notes from people all over the world. Some had lost their homes, others had lost loved ones. They said her story gave them hope. They said her airplane home reminded them that starting over didn't have to mean forgetting the past. She pinned every letter to a small corkboard near the cockpit, the place that had once guided the plane across the skies. Now, it guided hearts instead. One afternoon, A little girl arrived with her parents. She was quiet, holding a small drawing in her hand. The mom explained that her daughter had seen the story online and wanted to visit. The girl handed the woman the drawing. It showed the airplane surrounded by flowers, glowing under a bright sun. On the bottom, she had written in big uneven letters, *, you made the sky come back. *, the woman knelt down, tears filling her eyes. She hugged the girl and whispered, you made it brighter. As the days went on, the visitors became part of the rhythm of the house. Some came to see, others to stay a while. She started hosting small gatherings, poets, musicians, and neighbors who wanted a space to share stories. At night, the soft glow from the windows of the Boeing 727 shone across the valley like a beacon. It wasn't a house. It wasn't a plane. It was something in between, a bridge between the past and what's possible. Sometimes, when the stars were clear, she would step outside and look up at the sky. The body of the plane shimmered faintly in the moonlight. She would touch its side gently and whisper, we did it. And though the engines would never roar again, she swore she could still hear them, faint and distant, carrying the memories of every soul that ever flew inside it. Winter arrived quietly that year, wrapping the countryside in silence. Frost crept across the fields, and the trees stood bare against a pale sky. The plane, gleaming silver beneath the thin morning light, looked almost like it belonged there, a strange monument to resilience. Inside, the cabin stayed warm and glowing, every inch alive with the hum of small heaters, soft lights, and quiet music. The woman had finished most of the renovations by then, but she still found things to polish, small imperfections to fix. It wasn't about making it perfect anymore. It was about keeping it alive. One evening, she was sitting by the fireplace, her journal open on the table, when a knock echoed through the metal door. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened it, a young woman stood outside, clutching an envelope. I'm sorry to come so late, she said, shivering. I read about you online. My mom used to work on these planes. She was a flight attendant for 20 years. She passed away last month, but she always talked about how the 727 was her favorite. When I saw what you did, I thought she would have loved to see this. The woman stepped aside, inviting her in. The girl looked around, her eyes wide, taking in the soft lighting, the warm glow of the fire reflecting on the curved walls. She ran her fingers along the metal frame near the window and smiled faintly. It feels like home, she whispered. She handed the envelope to the woman. Inside was an old flight manual, worn and creased, and tucked between the pages was a faded photo of a smiling crew standing beside a Boeing 727. On the back of the photo were 3 words, * for the dreamers. * they sat together for hours that night, talking about the young woman's mother, about the flight she took, the places she saw, the stories she told. When the visitor finally left, the older woman stood at the door for a long moment, watching her car disappear down the road. Then she looked back at the photograph. * for the dreamers. * She smiled softly. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about all the people who had been connected to this plane long before she found it. The pilots, the passengers, the crew. Each of them had left a trace, a story that somehow lingered in the air. Maybe, she thought, this was why the plane had survived. Maybe it had been waiting, not for someone to restore it, but for someone to remember it. The next morning, she decided to start something new. She cleared out a section of the cabin and turned it into a small gallery. On one wall, she hung photos and letters from visitors. On another, she framed old flight maps and tickets she had found inside the plane. And in the center, under a soft light, she placed the photo that said * for the dreamers. * Soon, people began coming not just to see the plane, but to leave something behind, a note, a memory, a piece of their own story. Some brought postcards from places they once traveled. Others brought small objects that meant something to them, a locket, a keychain, a folded letter. She placed everything carefully inside what she called the memory wall. It became a living timeline, a mosaic of moments stitched together by strangers. One afternoon, a teacher brought a group of children from a nearby school. They sat cross-legged on the floor as she told them the story of how she found the plane. The kids listened with wide eyes, their faces glowing in the amber light. One of them raised his hand and asked, "Didn't you get scared, being alone here?" She smiled and shook her head. "I wasn't alone," she said softly. "The plane never let me be." After they left, she stood in the doorway again, listening to the faint echo of their laughter fading into the wind. She realized that what she had created wasn't just a home or an art piece. It was something bigger. The plane had become a place where people came to feel seen. A place that held the kind of warmth you can't build with walls or wood. That evening, as snow began to fall, she lit a small lantern near the entrance. The golden light spilled across the frosted ground, glowing against the darkness. From a distance, it looked like the old Boeing 727 was alive again, its cabin shining like a beacon, calling out to anyone who still believed in second chances. And inside, surrounded by stories and memories that once belonged to strangers, she whispered the same 3 words written on the photo. Asterisk for the dreamers. Asterisk spring came with soft rain and the smell of new life. The fields around the plane turned green again, and the air buzzed with quiet energy. Every morning, sunlight poured through the round windows, scattering golden reflections across the floor. The woman would wake early, make herself a cup of tea, and sit near the cockpit window watching the fog lift. Each day felt like a reminder that even the most broken things could find light again. Visitors continued to come, but now they arrived from far away. Journalists, travelers, even families who had seen the story online. Some stayed for a few hours, some for days. They didn't come just to look, they came to feel. There was something about the plane that pulled at people's hearts, something that reminded them of a time when dreams felt possible. And she welcomed them all. She never charged a fee. All she asked was that they leave behind something honest, something from the heart. One afternoon, a man in a suit arrived. He introduced himself as a representative from an airline company. "We'd like to feature your home in our anniversary magazine," he said, smiling. "It's inspiring." She laughed softly. "It's funny," she replied, "how the same company that once sent planes to the sky now finds one sitting still inspiring." He smiled, not sure if she was joking. She wasn't. As they toured the cabin, he asked about the process, how she'd done it, what it meant. She spoke slowly, her voice calm. "I didn't build a house," she said. "I built a promise, to never give up on what's been left behind." He nodded, scribbling notes, but she could tell he didn't fully understand. This wasn't a project for her. It was a conversation between her and time. That evening, when the man left, she found herself walking outside in the soft drizzle. The metal body of the Boeing glistened under the grey sky, drops sliding down its sides like tears. She placed her hand on the cool surface and whispered, "You're famous now," and smiled. For a moment, the wind moved through the trees in a way that almost sounded like laughter. A few weeks later, she hosted something new, a night of stories. People from the nearby towns gathered inside the plane with candles and guitars. They sat on the floor, sharing tales of love, loss, and hope. The air felt warm and alive. When someone played a soft tune on an old guitar, she noticed how the curved metal walls carried the sound gently, making it linger. The plane seemed to hum along, every rivet vibrating with memory. As the night went on, an older woman stood up from the back. Her hair was silver, her voice trembling slightly. She said she'd come because her husband used to be an aircraft mechanic, and he'd always said planes had souls. He believed, she said softly, that every plane he fixed carried a piece of him with it. She looked around, eyes glistening. If he could see this, he'd say you brought this one home. The room fell silent. No one moved. The woman nodded quietly, her throat tightening. Later, when everyone left, she walked through the cabin alone, picking up empty cups and folded blankets. She stopped near the fireplace, staring at the framed photo on the wall, the one that said asterisk for the dreamers. Asterisk. The candlelight flickered across the frame, and for just a second, she thought she saw movement in the reflection. A shadow, faint and soft, like someone leaning in the doorway watching over her. She didn't turn. She just smiled and whispered, "I know." The days that followed were quiet again. The crowd slowed down, but she didn't mind. She liked the stillness. She liked hearing the wind through the metal, the sound of rain tapping on the roof. Sometimes, when she walked through the narrow aisle, she could still hear faint echoes of voices, laughter, music, conversation. Not ghosts, not haunting. Just memories replaying themselves, grateful to be remembered. One morning, as she swept the floor, she found something small wedged under a corner seat. It was an old airline ticket, half torn, its ink almost faded. The destination read, asterisk home. Asterisk. She stared at it for a long time. Then she placed it on the memory wall, right beneath the photo that had started it all. That night, she sat by the cockpit window again, watching stars blink faintly through the trees. The plane was quiet, steady, alive. Somewhere deep in its frame, she swore she could feel a heartbeat, not metal, not mechanical, but human. Like every person who'd ever loved it had left something behind. She closed her eyes, resting her hand on the smooth aluminum beside her, and whispered the words that had become her truth. You never needed wings to fly.